Yeah, what's happening up here in Canada? It's the public and the private healthcare. It's like they're battling against each other. And what I'm seeing happening here is the erosion of the universal healthcare. And what I'd like to see is that, by doing this show, and hopefully in the future when we're able to get the documents in place on the website, we're able to show the people, look, there's where our money can come from to pay for proper universal health care. There's where our money can come from to pay for lower cost of tuition fees. There's where our money can pay for our social housing. There's where our money can come to pay for minimum wage Canada-wide of $18 an hour. People, there's where our money can come to pay for a flat tax, Canada-wide income tax of 5%. We're talking for the individual, 10% for the corporation. People of Canada should realize that we are one of the richest countries in the world in regards to natural resources. Why can't we Canadians benefit off of what God has given us and allow us to create a country where everyone is going to have a better life, better standard of living, and we're able to return Canada back in the hands of the Canadian people only? And that's one thing I keep pushing for. As I finish saying that, Steve, can we now move over? Let's Manitoba and Saskatchewan area, and also into Alberta, the prairie provinces. We know that we talked about Tanner involvement with the Minister of Mines and Lands. At the same time, we know that the Tarzans, actually there's about 5% the size of the Tarzan sitting in Saskatchewan right now. Saskatchewan is also responsible for uranium mining, and apparently there's an awful lot of poisoning of the rivers happening in northern Saskatchewan, which is affecting the Native Americans at this time. And at the same time, the Tarzans in Alberta, 60 Minutes was saying is anywhere from 170 billion barrels of oil all the way up to possibly 2 trillion barrels of oil. Now, in that area alone, let's not talk about the oil for a second. Let's talk about the other stuff, limestone, gold, copper, silver, just the minerals in itself. What ballpark figure did you get from your father?
Well, the thing that made me actually aware of what my father was doing, because he would take me on these various trips in the 70s and 80s, because I was, like you're saying, on my engineering background, he was just strictly a geologist. So he'd actually take me on these trips, and I'd go and I would basically tell him what would be the commercial application, like you're saying about the limestone property and the tar sands and the coal and the other precious metals and whatever, and semi-precious. And so what I did in 1985, 1986, 1987 is I set up operations right there in Lethbridge, Calgary. I set up one there in Vancouver offices. I had an office in Regina, Saskatchewan. I had a factory and a big outlet right there in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and of course my other outlet up there in Toronto. And so I would go up there with my contract and contacts was with Route Canada, which is the big major trucking operation, and also with Sears Canada. So I actually had my product being marketed through Sears Canada, and that enabled me basically to go out on the road, to get on the radio stations, to go meet with the news media, basically to give the benefits of what this product that I was manufacturing right there in Winnipeg and Grand Forks, North Dakota, to basically get people to openly talk about their natural resources. Because, like you say, I was the go for this dad of the geologist of this organization, of the United States and of the Mormon Church, and I guess any other joint venture partner with them, which of course is the Rothschilds, the Federal Reserve, because they needed Clyde Davis to give a mining report. And so when I set up offices in Lethbridge, when I set up offices there in Winnipeg and in Regina, I would basically go to the various business meetings and stuff, and amazingly how they always had a cocktail. And I would always have like a proclaimed Mormon. I told everybody I'm a Christian Mormon, and basically I'd have a Shirley Temple or a ginger ale or whatever in hand, and basically because they knew who my father was, they would be totally openly telling me how happy they were that I was up there, that I had an operation, that I was working with Sears Canada, that I was working with their people to give back pain and therapy stuff on the factories that I'd actually acquired and set up. And in the discussions that you're saying, they're so openly talking to me about what a great secret deal they have with my father, with the Mormon Church, with the basic way of what they would do with Mormon money. In other words, what basically happens every Sunday night. Sunday night, basically, there in Salt Lake City, they would get an accounting on what monies that they had brought in from the 30,000 wards and branches and organizations they have all over the world. So Sunday night, they would have an actually accounting. And so guess what they would do? They would basically go to the World Bank, they'd go to the International Monetary Fund and find out, well, what funding and stuff has gotten into default. And so they'd go to basically countries like Canada, which really did not have it, but they basically showed what they were doing in other countries like Brazil that had defaulted notes, or Argentina, or like you're saying about Chile, and they would take and buy those defaulted closed-down notes that had been issued by the United Nations, and basically pay 5 cents on the dollar to buy a non-available paid note. Then they'd go to that country and basically have that country issue brand new face-valued things of that note. And the Mormon Church would promise that they'll bring in these great retired executives and help promote and get things going. Well, this is what they started doing up there all over Canada. They would call these retired business executives of the Mormon Church to go on a work mission. And they would go into Lethbridge, and these great executives would basically manage the money laundering that they would be bringing in to go and invest into to get closed down or hurting companies, and basically fund the operations of transporting or doing mining development or extraction and all like that, and they would do it basically under contract. And like I say, through a Dory bar contract, who knows what they were shipping out. And a lot of the shipments, and especially the big pipeline that they have up there in Lloydminster, there in Alberta, Canada, where they're actually dealing with the heavy oil. The heavy oil is a technology that I brought up there to Canada. This was back in 1985. Where you basically do an in situ drill, you put down a special formula down in ground, and it causes an exothermic chemical reaction, and it lessens the viscosity of the oil, and it comes out with a high grade. This is what we introduced back in 1985, and so how successful is the oil business up there in Lloydminster? Well, it's massively producing mass amount of petroleum through heavy oil crude that used to be very similar to like down in Baker, California, where we are actually working with Chevron back in the 70s. And so to give you a financial figure, I think it would be an injustice to the public to tell them what my father knew about it, because my father basically was told, oh, we're in control of basically the natural resources, of letting people here in Canada feel comfort as we provide them a few crumbs and comfort level and socialized medicine and socialized protection and whatever, while we basically control the natural resources of Canada. And we want that to help out our organization, our little club. And that's why I got so upset with my father that, as you know, in 1998, I sued my parents for their DNA.
Yeah, that's amazing. So well, based on all the information that you've gathered from all the individuals you've talked to, what would be a ballpark figure, let's say for the region of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, monetary-wise, just an estimated number?
Oh, in today's dollars, probably $1 billion a month.
A month?
Yeah.
So that's $12 billion a year. Let's times that by, just 30 years alone, and people at home are doing their math. All of a sudden, you're realizing all those little things I was talking about are quite easy. Now let's head up to the north. We're talking Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Inuvik. To the people out there, the federal government ratified a United Nations treaty in 2003. What it said was that Canada, we control only up to about 22.7 kilometers off of our coastline, unless we can prove with the continental shelf will stretch all the way over. Then we can control basically what it'll stretch over to in regards to the islands apart. Now, if you take a look at that in the northern part, there's about 100 kilometers from the mainland of Canada all the way up to the Baffin Islands area, and in that we have the Northwest Passageway that goes through there. So what people have to realize is that our government signed away our territory that belongs to Canada and Canadians out there. And what is the estimated monetary value just in that area that you have been informed about there, Steve?
Well, my dad said that still is virgin area, that they're still developing that because of the weather, because of the transportation limitations and all, but he says it's basically half of what they're doing right there in Alberta.
Oh, wow, that's about $6 billion a year. That's interesting itself. So at the same time, as we're moving over, we also have to remember about the diamonds being, extracted in the north at the same time. And I used to love watching this one TV show they were called Ice Truck Divers, and they showed these truck drivers for only a couple months of the year. They're driving over frozen lakes to deliver the supplies up to these mining camps. At this time, they're located up in the northwest. I think in the Northwest Territories area. But with that said, I'd like to go over to BC. Now, we know about I've always said to everyone, British Columbia, for the last 40 to 50 years, every single government in BC has ran this province to the ground. We can look at every single government that's been in place, Dave Barrett, the Social Credit, the NDP again, and now the Liberals, and each and every government has its own form of scandal / corruption / laws been put in place, which has taken the money from the people. Texada Island is an example. We also had Dallas Hill in here on August 9th from last time we were talking to Steve. He's talking about Stewart, BC, northern BC. They walked up, they took a whole entire mountain down, topsoil, loaded it onto a barge, and shipped it out. Now, what kind of monetary system, value do you think is in place here in the province of British Columbia in regards to the natural resources there, Steve?
Well, you've got to also bring in the connection of Vancouver, Canada, be the closest communication to Hong Kong and Asia. Basically, Vancouver is the hot spot of being the launderer of massive amounts of billions, if not trillions of dollars coming in from Asia, basically coming through the Commonwealth operation. And so they're basically going into public companies, they're going into mining operations and stuff like that. And the beautiful story about mining operations and public companies is that the insiders in Canada have a much more liberal way of inside trading. And they're finally clamping down on that. But I was just there in Vancouver just some weeks ago, and I basically arrived there at your border, and they basically spend nearly an hour going through my whole car trying to see if I have anything coming in. Because inside my trunk I had special documents that I've been working with Jorge, one of your key persons in the mining industry there in Vancouver, and I had all this information against Barrick Gold. And when they saw all the information that I had in the connection with Barrick Gold with all of the politicians in Canada, because by golly, when Brian Mulroney no longer was the Prime Minister, he and George Bush Sr. basically joined on the counseling of telling Barrick Gold how to operate, especially in Vancouver, with doing natural resources. The figure that my dad gave to me, he said, "Geez, son, it'd be probably $5 to $10 billion a month," because they're also doing the extraction and operations in Vancouver that would deal with the Asian area. And so there's a vast amount of money that comes in and out of Vancouver, and the poor John Q. public there is just overwhelmed at seeing how a company is one day so great and the next day it's down. I mean, talk about stock manipulation. There's a whole nother ingredient in that about the Vancouver natural resources that very few people even talk about.